All right, well, welcome everybody to tonight's webinar. Today is the third night of our integrated reasoning webinar series that we're hosting for our Beat the GMAT community. So if you've been living in a hole in the last couple of weeks, you may not know that the GMAT is actually being updated next month, June 5th. So the AWA issues section is going away and being replaced by a new section called integrated reasoning. A series of really fun questions, actually, the more that I learn about it. And tonight we are going to be doing a deep dive of one question type for integrated reasoning called multi-source reasoning. And I'm delighted because we're going to be joined by Liz Moliski, who is on the line with us. And she is an expert with Manhattan GMAT, one of the elite test prep companies out there in the market. And she will be walking us through her presentation on how we can tackle multi-source reasoning questions in the new integrated reasoning section. So before I pass it over to Liz to take over this session, I just want to provide a little bit of background. So I can't think of anyone more qualified, frankly, to do this presentation. Liz has a PhD in decision sciences from Chicago's Booth School of Business. Wow, I feel very dumb saying that. That's quite a pedigree there, Liz. And not only that, you know, she is an educator at heart. She has a special interest in helping students overcome test anxiety. And I think for many of us out there in the community, that's something that we really do deal with is the pressure of the test day and understanding how to cope with that. So Liz is an expert at that. A couple things more about her background as well. So before she returned to school for a doctorate, and an MBA, by the way, from Booth. Liz earned a degree in math from my alma mater, Stanford University, go Cardinal. And then she worked as a computer programmer at Apple, as well as at several high-tech startups in Silicon Valley. Liz also is the co-author of Manhattan GMAT's GMAT Roadmap book. And as you can imagine, based on her background and her skills, she's a highly sought-after instructor. I imagine a couple of you after this webinar are going to be reaching out to Liz frantically to get some of her time. Liz, it's such a pleasure to have you this evening. Thanks so much for being here.
Why, thank you, Eric. What an introduction. My goodness. And it's great to join you guys at the Beat the GMAT community. Okay, so let's get started. Thank you, all of you who have told me where you are. It's nice to know I've got a worldwide audience. And that most of you are actually taking the GMAT after June 5th with IR. So what I'd like to do, let me just flip forward through my slides. What we're going to talk about, as Eric said, we're going to talk about multi-source reasoning problems. And this is a workshop, so guess what? You guys are going to be solving problems, not just talking about problems. Okay, you have to try it. All right, so here's me. But I think Eric has already covered all of this stuff. One thing I do want to say is that I have a lot of material to cover since we are going to be doing problems. I will try and push most of the general questions about MSRs and IR in general to the end. We will save some
Hey
time.
Liz, this is Eric, and I'm really sorry to interrupt, but we actually couldn't see your slides change. Can you actually jump into the presentation mode?
Oh, Eric, I am so sorry. Okay, so let me put it into presentation mode, and let's see what happens.
Yeah. So.
All right. All right, how's that? If I scroll forward, can you see my slides change?
No, not yet, actually. So why don't we do this? Would it be possible for you to maybe stop showing your screen and then re-show it again? There might be some sort of pause.
Sure.
Oh, you know what? I think I know exactly what's happening. I think there might be a pause button that that we accidentally hit at the beginning. There should be a play button that you see. Ah, perfect. Okay, we jumped back into the presentation.
Okay, fantastic.
Well, appreciate your patience, guys. And also, just to reiterate, feel free to post questions about the content that Liz is sharing throughout this presentation. And we will have some time reserved at the end to review some of your questions. So Liz, again, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I think I touched a button and my presentation just vanished on me. Hang on, guys. I'm going to flip back to it, and I'm not going to touch anything. Okay. All right, so let's go through this. MSRs, here's me, a lot of stuff to cover. You already know that. We're going to be doing problems. So let me show you our agenda. First
Hey, Liz,
we're going to talk to you about the basics of
Liz,
MSRs.
this is Eric. My apologies for interrupting one more
no.
time. I think that we're still having a technical issue. We don't see your slides in presentation mode right now. We see, can you go ahead and hit the play button again? Let's see what happens. And
okay. All right.
So
okay.
You must have like a dual screen happening. I think you may want to...
let me show screen 2.
Yes, got it. All right. I think we finally did it. Audience members, thanks so much for your patience. As you know, the general rule is before we start any technical presentation, you must have 7 minutes of technical problems. And we've gone through that, and I think it's going to be smooth sailing from here on out, Liz. So it's all yours again.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. I hope it's done now. Because after we talk about basics, we're going to do some practice problems. And that's actually going to be the bulk of the presentation. Afterwards, I've just got some sort of sum up themes and additional resources for you, resources where to find more stuff on IR in general and MSRs in particular. And then for the last 10 minutes or so, we'll do questions. All right, so first thing, just a quick review. I know a lot of you have been attending these seminars, so you already know this. But IR integrates quant and verbal, plus it adds real-world data. Okay, and why is this important? Real-world data looks something like this, and here's a little MSR off to the left showing the tabs. This is important because you're going to be analyzing cases in business school. Okay, and these IR problems really were designed to be sort of mini case analysis problems, and this is especially true with MSR problems. These are the most case-like of all because you'll have multiple sources of data. All right, hence the name, multi-source reasoning. Okay, so thinking about this, and you'll have a calculator, just as you would have a calculator in business school if you were analyzing a case. Sadly, no Excel, but at least they give you the calculator. Okay, so just a recap of some basics. An IR section has 10 prompts. A prompt is not a question, okay? A prompt is a source of data. All right, so you can think of it as a prompt is a mini case. With the most case-like of all being these MSRs, the multi-source reasoning, because you'll have a tabbed prompt with multiple things to go back and forth between. Just way too fun. Okay, and multi-source reasoning and tables are interactive, whereas graphics interpretation and two-part analysis are static. They're more like traditional standardized test questions, just with a little bit of a new IR skin. Okay, so now important things to note. There are 12 questions, 10 prompts, but 12 questions. Okay, most of these prompts have just one set of questions. And notice, you can see this, you've already probably covered this. A lot of the question types have multiple sub-questions, and in order to get one right, you have to get the whole thing right. Okay, so now why are MSRs so special? Okay, well, you may only have one MSR prompt, but 3 questions depend on it. A traditional multiple choice, just like you're used to answering already on the GMAT, and 2 panels of either-ors. An either-or panel has 3 mini questions. Typically 1 or 2 are very easy, and 1 is not so easy. And again, you have to get them all right. The other types are more typical in that you have 1 prompt and 1 question. All right, so far just the high-level information. So, you know, if you divide the time evenly, it's about 2.5 minutes per question, but the MSR will take longer. Even just multiplying this by 3, all right, you're going to be spending 7.5 minutes on that MSR. So it is pretty significant. All right. what I'm going to start off with is telling you that, look, a lot of the data that you're going to see in the MSR is a lot like what you'll see in tables and graphs, okay? Not hugely different, all right? They'll just put a table on a tab, typically. Okay, so there's definitely commonality and overlap between the IR types. The most like the current GMAT sections are two-part analysis, and the most like cases are the MSRs. All right. Okay, so how do you approach these? How on earth does anyone do a case study in 7.5 minutes? Well, thank goodness it's a mini case study. So what we talk about is having a systematic approach. First thing you want to do is understand the prompt. You've got to go through these tabs of data and figure out the story behind the data. We call that asking yourself what and so what. What's there and so what? So what is sort of the plot line of the story? How are these graphs or charts, or how is this text all related? Okay, and you need to let yourself do this, get a little bit of an understanding before you really look at the question. Then you go and you focus on each question as you answer it, and you try and translate it to concrete terms. Again, what exactly are they asking me? What do I need to figure out? Before you try, okay, before you even try to solve, you need to figure out what you're being asked, what you've been told. Then you can plan your approach and solve. And you want to take a few moments to think about what's going to be an easy approach. The IR section rewards the strategic test taker. There's nothing here that you could have memorized. There's nothing that you'll jump at instantly. All right, so you do want to take your time thinking and being strategic. Okay, so speaking about thinking and being strategic, we have a strategy for universal problem solving. How many of you have Manhattan GMAT's books? Anybody seen the Manhattan GMAT 5th edition? Give me a shout out or something in the question window, because if you have, you're familiar with this. If not, welcome to it. Right? We think this is a great way for dealing with any sort of a complex problem. First thing you have to do is understand, okay, what and so what, create your mental map. It's very important in MSRs that you focus on the precise language. What exactly are they asking? Not what in general, what specifically. Then you come up with a plan. The GMAT is tricky. Hopefully that's not news to anyone here. Hopefully everybody knows the GMAT's kind of tricky. So you want to look for easy paths. Even though IR is more real world-like, you still have this sort of how did these people get so tricky thing going on, okay? And you want to do this before you solve. Some of the tasks, if you think about, what's the easiest way to solve this, you'll come up with something, very grade school, something like, oh, if I just count the dots below this line, I'll get the answer. All right. And another thing that we found really helpful when we solved as instructors at Manhattan and when we've been teaching our students to solve this, don't be shy. All right, you've got all this data, and it really helps if you let yourself interact with it. You're probably going to want to jot things down for the MSRs because the data is in different tabs, and we forget. Pointing at charts when you see them and repeating to yourself is a great way to keep something in mind. Flipping back using the on-screen calculator. So don't worry that anyone's going to be looking at you in the test center. Even if they do, who cares if you get a great score, right? And this kind of stuff really helps with MSRs because you've got all of this data to deal with. Okay, so online calculator. How many of you have given the online calculator a whirl? GMAT's new online calculator, either in the new GMAT prep, or looking at OG13, looking at some of the sample questions up on GMAT's website. Any of you given this calculator a whirl? Okay, anyone? I'm scared to touch my buttons here and see what anyone has to say, but I do see people typing in. Okay. All right. And I highly recommend that you do this, that you practice with an online calculator. You want the calculator. The calculator is your friend. You've got real-world data, and the numbers are not so pretty. Okay? So I want you guys to solve along with me. Find your desktop calculator. On your PC, on your Mac, I don't care what computer you're on. I know there's a desktop accessory somewhere that's a calculator. Okay, and yeah, you know, as my slide says, there's been more than one version of the calculator on GMAT sites. You know, some have percent, some don't. Some have 1 over X, some don't. Don't worry about it. You always have digits and arithmetic, and that honestly is all you need. Okay, so get out those calculators before we take a look at a problem. All right, because that's going to be our next step. Okay, I'm just going to give you guys a moment to get the calculator started, and let's move into our next stage of the presentation. Now's the fun part. Now we're going to have a little class on MSRs. We're going to do some practice problems. Okay. Whoops. All right. Hopefully you guys still see my screen in presentation mode.
Hey, Liz, this is Eric. I think you need to reshare the other monitor again. Hey, Liz, can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Got it. Thank you, Eric.
Yep, no worries.
All right. Sorry. Thank you so much for your help. Okay. So, yes, you can use a calculator during the IR section. All right. So everybody's got it out. We're going to take a look at a practice problem. Okay. And I want you to do this with me. Okay. So I'm going to read it. And we're going to ask ourselves, what and so what? You know, what is this about? And why do we care? So what? In 2009, China was the biggest export market for several countries on many continents. Among these countries, we've got Australia, so 21.8%, Brazil, 12.5%, Japan, 18.9%, and South Africa sent 10.3% of its exports. Tables to China. Tables 1 and 2 provide another, perhaps more revealing measure of the impact of economic exports to China. The value of exports relative to the GDP for many of China's major trade partners, including the EU in 2009. So what do you guys get from this? What's going on here? What are they talking about? All right, type it in. Think about it. What and so what? I pull something from this right away, okay? I know that China is the biggest export market for a bunch of countries, and there's a list of countries, all right? They also tell me that there's additional, more revealing data. So I'm already thinking, you know what? This other data is probably going to be about some of these countries that they mention, and things like the GDP, okay? Value of exports. All right, so I'm already in my mind setting up what else is here. All right, and that helps me to get an understanding of the data. And again, I want to look at the data before I really look at the question. Okay, so let's sort of move along. I might click on that second tab, and here I see Table 1. All right, and I've got nation or region, and I've got GDP. Anybody notice anything looking at this about the nation or region? You know, you want to try and connect each tab to the other tabs. They're all connected. They're part of a story. What's going on here? Anybody see anything? All right, I noticed something here. Yeah, some of you are noticing it as well. There's overlap, isn't there? There's overlap in the countries. I have Australia, but then I have different things as well. I've got world. So there's overlap, but it's not perfect. Okay. All right, and then I've got the GDP of every nation or region listed. Okay, and IR is full of stuff like this. Real world data, a lot of it downloaded from census sites. Okay, and by the way, you cannot sort these tables. Unlike the sortable table problems, MSR tables are never sortable. Just a little note, you should know billion and million, billions 10 to the 9th, millions 10 to the 6th. You don't actually have to use it here, but sometimes you do have to be careful of units of things like dollars and population. All right, so we're kind of done with this one. Let's take a look at table 2. Okay, now we see, all right, nation or region, we see continent, exports to China as a percentage of GDP. Okay, so same sort of thing going on in this table, right? We do have some overlap. There's Australia again, there's Brazil, and the EU, but we also have new things, okay, like other countries that weren't in the previous table, okay. Okay, so we can see how they're connected, and then there's this whole thing with continent. All right, so much for now. Okay. So now you have a good mental map of what's going on in the data, and you can pretty well predict what field connects everything. Okay, it's got to be the name of the countries. All right. Okay, so here I'm just made it easy. I put everything all together so that you can see. This is all about finding connections, what we call finding the story in the data. And this is very similar to what you'll do when you do case analysis in business school. You'll have all this disparate data, and you have to pull a story out of it. Some of your data will be in tables, some of it will be in text. Okay, and you want to look, well, where are the connections? What can I figure out? Okay, some countries show up in every single table. All right. You also want to think, how could you combine that data? Anyone looking at this, if I have exports to China as a percentage of GDP versus GDP, what could I figure out? Just quickly noticing it. All right, type it in quickly. Yeah, some of you are on it. Okay, so the more you do this, the more natural and comfortable this becomes. You just naturally will start to see, how could I combine the data? That's part of the so what, the story of this data. What could I figure out from this? All right, and you don't have to calculate it right now. They haven't asked you about it, but this sort of preview and seeing how the puzzle fits together is incredibly helpful. Otherwise, these MSRs can take forever, okay? And we do want to get through them in a timely manner. This, by the way, I should point it out. I've got this little legend down in the bottom on the right, New York Times quiz, 7/22/11. This is from the first batch of problems that GMAT released in a New York Times article in August of 2011. Okay, so it's an actual problem written by GMAT. All right. Okay, so we already figured this out. We figured out how we could combine. Okay. Now, the other thing that's really important, a lot of these problems are percent problems. A ton of fraction, decimal, and percent problems in these MSRs, and that's because a lot of data involves calculating fractions or percents, right? Okay. So we're looking at percent of GDP, okay? You always want to be thinking percent of what, though, right? Australian exports to China, 21.8% of all of Australia's exports, but that's only 3.4% of Australia's GDP. You don't want to reverse the two, okay? So you have to be a little careful. There will be little tricky things like this. And I always say percent of what? That's part of the story. Okay? So, I know it looks like we're cheating. All this data is on different tabs. How on earth are you going to be able to do this? Right? You've got this difficult task because you can't see them all at once. And this is actually part of the design. Okay? GMAT is challenging your working memory. How do you deal with this? All right, how many of you have ever repeated a phone number over and over until you could get it into your cell phone or write it down or something? How many of you have ever repeated a number? Any of you? Number repeaters? Yeah, okay. I think everyone has done this. This is your tape loop. What you're doing is rather than trying to just count on your working memory to automatically remember it, all right, that repeating helps it stay in your mind. If any of you have a psych background, it's your phonological loop. Uh, but you're just recruiting another resource from your brain, another capability, to help yourself be able to do that. And this is another reason to mutter under your breath. As you flip back and forth between the tabs, repeat something to yourself so you don't forget it. The other choice is to write it down. If you're solving a problem, I would typically write it down. But as you flip back and forth at first, I'm often just repeating, just to help myself keep things straight and figure out, how does it all map together. Okay? Don't be embarrassed. You're going to get a fantastic score. It's worth it. All right? So, now let's try a problem. Okay? And Eric, I don't know if you can help me out. I'm going to give everybody, why don't you guys just take a minute and try this problem out. What do you think? I'm just going to be quiet for a moment. You guys look at this. Try it out.
I'm here, Liz, so I can help you to explain what I'm seeing coming in from the questions and responses.
Okay. Hopefully I've got the main screen going in. Everyone can see the presentation.
Yep. I
All
think
right.
folks
Try
need
solving this problem. Hopefully.
Yeah, that's right. Liz, I think folks are still thinking about it. I see a little bit of eerie silence in the questions coming in. I see
Eerie silence.
Well, I see one response from Ashutosh. I hope I pronounced that name correctly. The answer is C. So would love to. I see a couple of responses that say C so far. Oh, one from Perul, A, C, D. Oh, okay, we're seeing the spectrum starting to get represented here, but I think mostly C's at this point.
All right. Okay. And it's a pretty challenging problem. And I'm wondering, how many of you have calculators out? This is a problem where the calculator would really make a difference if I'm seeing a lot of C's. Okay. Let's first of all think about how to solve this. All right. Based on the information provided, which one of the following quantities is closest to the total value in 2009 US dollars of Japan's 2009 exports to all countries? This is not a lookup problem. We don't have that. We do have Japan all over the place, and some of you are clearly thinking in the right direction, right? We're trying to look at this 2009 US dollars of Japan's exports to all countries. Okay, it's got to be about dollars, it's got to be about Japan, so you definitely need that second chart with the GDP. That's dollars, and somehow we've got to take a percentage of that. And we need the entries on Japan. Exports to all countries. Okay, I think that's what makes it tough. And we can just ignore 2009, right? Because everything's about 2009. Okay. So when I thought about this, I thought, well, all right, so here are my three graphs, right? I've got these connections going on. Okay, if I look up Japan, 2.2% of exports to China represent 2.2% of its GDP. All right. And exports to China also represent, and this is just from that text block over here, 18.9% of its total exports. All right, so I'm wondering, those of you who got C, if you rounded, how many of you just rounded and did this when we're thinking of this? How many of you rounded? Type in, let me know if you rounded. Maybe Eric can let me know. Did a lot of people round?
Let me look at the responses here. So 2 yeses, a no, no. So the no's have it, but just by hair.
Just by a hair.
Yeah, and also I'm
Okay.
seeing a little more D's coming in too as answer response as
Yeah.
well.
I think I gave it away. Okay. On traditional GMAT quant, you can round, right? IR is different. IR is real-world numbers. All right. If I look at this, if I did rounding, you know, I might look up in that second chart, the nation or region, the GDP chart, Japan's GDP, and say, it's about 5,000. You know, 5069, fine, 5,000. And then I look up in the third chart, exports to China as a percentage of GDP. I might say 2.2%, round that to 2%, and say, okay, so that's 100 for exports to China. Okay, so if 100 is 20%, then I would think 500, and I might pick C, but I would have just been trapped. All right. Anyone got trapped. You might have noticed that you rounded low. Okay. But if you used the actual numbers and used your calculator, you would have come up with the correct answer, which is D. All right, so the hard part here is figuring out what math to do. The untraining yourself from GMAT quant habits is realizing that, no, actually you should use the calculator. Even if you're really good at math, give yourself a break, use the calculator. The numbers are close, answers are really close, and you'll get things wrong and then you don't get credit. Okay, even though you might have understood how to solve it. But big kudos to those of you who understood how to solve it. Many people find this problem quite challenging. Okay. All right, so any thoughts on this as we're going forward? Hopefully I'll pause for just a minute in case anyone has any big thoughts on this. But this is really typical of a more challenging MSR problem. All right, the multiple choice. Where you have to use your calculator and you have to know what the math is.
I see a question coming in, Liz, from Priyanka, and Priyanka is asking for clarification about, can you explain the 18.9% on the screen?
Sure. Absolutely, Priyanka. The 18.9% is from the text. Okay, we know from that first tab that Japan sent 18.9% of its exports to China. All right, so we know the total value, dollar value of the exports was this 111.5 billion, and we know that that's 18.9% of the total exports. Okay, so then you just set up a proportion. All right, if 18.9%, or 18.9 over 100 is going to be equal to 111.5 over x, and then you just solve for x. Okay, but that 18.9 is in the text, and that also is very common on MSR. There are numbers in the text. So it's like GMAT has thrown you a little curveball here, reading comprehension problems with numbers, numbers that you need to solve the problem. All right,
Great.
did I get your question?
I think so, and yes, Priyanka actually reconfirmed, got it. So great explanation there, Liz, and in the interest of time, why don't we go ahead and move forward?
Yeah, okay, fantastic. So this is typical of what a multiple choice will be. All right, you'll only have one of these with the MSR, and often it's, the math isn't that hard, but it can be tricky to set up under the time pressure. So the key, again, is just thinking, what do I know? How does it fit together? Don't try to write equations until you've figured out what's going on. I'd like to move on and take a look at another one. Okay, this is going to be a series of either or questions. Okay, so it says for each of the following countries or regions, determine whether its 2009 exports to China can be shown based on the given information to have exceeded 100 billion in 2009 US dollars. Okay, so as you're reading, you might want to be thinking, where am I going to get the data? And you're supposed to indicate yes if exports can be shown to exceed that value, otherwise you indicate no. All right, so I'm going to show you the panel in just a moment, but just take a moment and look and think, what chart or charts should you be looking at to get this? Okay, to get the dollar value of exports to China. All right, and remember, you're going to pick yes if you can prove it, if for sure, okay, and no if you can't prove. And that means, and this is interesting also, no means either no and I can prove that it's less than that, or it also means I just can't get an answer. Okay, this is sort of an interesting subtlety. All right, so let's take a look. Let's take a look at the actual panel now. Okay, so again, you have to get all three of these right to get the question right. All right, so anybody notice anything looking at these? We've got European Union, we've got Japan, and we've got Nigeria. Okay, anybody notice anything looking at the charts? Let's see, I'm going to give everyone, and then Eric, if you see anything. Anybody notice anything that sort of stands out about the question? And again, I really advise that you be thoughtful rather than rushing to answer. You can often save yourself a lot of work.
Let's see. I see a response from Irusha. Can't do Nigeria because Nigeria is the only one that isn't in both charts. See a bunch of people saying that Nigeria is only on one chart. Nigeria's presence is incomplete. Yes.
Exactly. Fantastic. Okay, so immediately you know, if you realize that you needed both charts, you don't even have to think about Nigeria because you don't have the data. Okay, so we can concentrate on the European Union and on Japan, where we have data in the two charts. Okay, and remember, you could estimate this by hand, but use your little friend. Okay, your little friend is that calculator. Don't make this more mentally draining than it has to be. All right, I can just go and calculate for the European Union, right? European Union, I know I've got GDP 16,415, okay, and I'm just a little calculator monkey, all right, and then I need to take 0.7, multiply it by 0.7%, okay, so that's 0.007 goes into my calculator, or percent if I've got the percent key. Boom, I'm done. All right, I could estimate it. You're right. I could say, oh, 1% of that, I could use my GMAT habits. Is going to be, 164. But why? Why work so hard? It's not necessary. Okay, same thing with Japan. I could estimate, or I could just punch into my little friend, the calculator. Okay, and if you have a percent button, use it. Otherwise, it's 0.0, 0.0 whatever. Okay, everybody can figure out how to enter a percent, although we do find that that is a common challenge on these questions. Just getting comfortable with that calculator. So this is something where if you look at your charts and you use your calculator well, boom, you'll be done with this in a minute. All right, and you can save some time for the tougher one, like the previous one. Okay, so then you just, of course, click on the little boxes. Any questions so far? I'm going to pause for a moment in case there are questions and let Eric relay them to me. Any questions so far? Or are we comfortable with this?
We actually do have a couple of questions coming in. So here's one. Is the calculator accessible via keyboard, or do you have to use the mouse?
Okay, that is a fantastic question. And what we've found in what GMAT has made available is that you do have to use the mouse. You can type in the numbers, But to bring it up, you click on something. But you can type in the numbers instead of mouse clicking on the buttons. All right.
Gotcha.
It's a little weird to use. I would say for sure practice with it. Use GMAT Prep and practice to be comfortable, because it gives you such a huge advantage in IR to be able to use it. It saves you just a lot of mental energy.
Great. So I think we can probably move on at this point, Liz.
All right, fantastic. Let's take a look, okay, at something else. This would be just the second one of these. And again, I'm not going to spend as long on this one. You know, we know all of this. Okay, examine each of the following statements and indicate yes if the statement can be inferred from the information provided, otherwise indicate no. And then they say all amounts are measured in 2009 US dollars, so we already know what yes and no mean. Okay, no means either you can't infer it or you know that it's false. Okay, all right, so first question, India's exports to China exceeded Russia's exports to China. Okay, and I'm going to move sort of quickly through this. Again, I just get out my little friend and I'd compute. Okay, India, Russia, here we go. Okay, so the answer here is no. All right, and again, you could approximate, but why? Other thing you could do, you know, if you notice it, if you write down the numbers, you notice this 1237 and 1232 are practically identical. The percentage is much bigger for Russia, okay, so you know it's that. But do you have to be so clever? No, you really don't. It's IR. Okay. All right, so here's another one. The amount of exports to China from all the countries of South America combined exceeded 10 billion. What is weird about this? And this is a typical, this is an IR sort of thing. This is not what you would see on the quant section of the GMAT, not at all. Anyone? What's weird? Type it in. What on earth?
Let's see. So we're seeing
countries of South America.
Yeah, so we're seeing there's only one country from South America listed.
There's only one country listed, exactly. So at first you might think, well, I can't answer this question. Okay, but let's take a look at that one country, because if its exports, it's Brazil, exceed 10 billion, okay, then we would be good. All right. So if I look at Brazil alone, yeah, that's enough to tell me. So even though I might initially stop and pause on this and say, oh, I don't have information on all the countries in South America, that would be a mistake. All right, since Brazil alone is over it. So this kind of trickery where at first you might think, oh, I don't have the data, go a step further. Think about it, okay? Because this is a greater than 10 billion. All right, so let me just move along. Unless there are a lot of questions on these, I think these we can just sort of move through. Okay, and then this one, Australia's exports to China accounted for more than 1/5 of Australia's total exports. Why, look, it's a fraction to decimal conversion problem, 1/5. Well, what do I know about Australia's exports? I just looked this up. You know, 1/5 is 20%. Okay, and if you struggled with that, you could divide 1 by 5 in your calculator, but I don't think you guys would have to do that. All right. So this one's sort of one of the gimmies, and that's nice. There are some on these panels that are gimmies. Okay, so that really concludes what I wanted to say really about, you know, in terms of doing these problems. All right, don't forget numbers in the text. I think this is the hardest for many people. You're so used to GMAT with numbers and text being segregated, and that's not the case here. All right, on IR, and these MSRs are, all of them are mixed. Okay. You know, again, it's just showing you a different way to do it. But really what I want to go on to now are just takeaways. What can you take away from this to make the process of solving IRs easier? And particularly these MSRs, which are the most challenging in terms of coordinating all the information. Definitely try to understand the prompt, asking yourself what and so what. Think about these connections and the distinctions. Use your mental tape loop to carry between tabs. Don't be embarrassed about muttering under your breath. Be sure that you understand the question. Okay, focus on the specific language, and then plan your approach. Use the calculator as much as you want to. There's some variation. Some of you will be so practiced with converging, say, fractions to decimals that you don't need a calculator for that. But don't get too cocky, all right? If the calculation is complicated, like that first one we saw, use the calculator. Okay? And some of these questions, especially the yes/nos, the either/ors, will be things that you can just look up. They'll be very straightforward. Just say thank you. Don't worry. GMAT will find other uses for your time. Okay, so a couple of things to keep in mind. There are some MSRs with just 2 tabs. They are not necessarily shorter or easier. They just cram more information on those tabs. Not always tables. They can contain tables or graphs. Again, I told you MSRs are a lot like tables and graphs. Okay, and some of them, there are a few of them that are just all dialogue. They have no numbers whatsoever. Reading this is a little different than reading a typical reading comprehension because you should make inferences, real-world inferences. You have to think about people's expectation and their willingness to do things. A little different, a little more real-world than reading comp, which is so very much on the surface. Okay. So with that, I just wanted to make sure that I leave time for questions at the end. So let me just show you a couple of my thoughts here. Things to keep in mind: don't be panicked by IR. It really is designed to test the same core skills that the GMAT overall tests. It's just that they're, same topics. The emphasis is different. We're looking at real-world data. There's much more of a focus on percents, fractions, reading charts, reading graphs, things that you actually would do in a case study rather than, creative little games with number properties and combinatorics. The general universal problem-solving strategy works really well here. MSRs, because they are complicated, really reward people who take time to understand and plan before solving. You won't be able to solve any of these from memory. And there usually is an easier path. Okay. Other thing, you don't want to let IR mess up the rest of your test. You definitely should practice this. We are also finding that people find this substantially more draining than the essay. And so we're recommending, there have been a lot of studies, a lot of psychological studies actually, of college students performing challenging intellectual tasks, finding that the brain drains its glucose supply, and most people will find IR far more challenging than the old essays. So we're recommending that you drink half a Gatorade or other sports drink, lemonade, whatever, after IR to sort of refuel your brain's glucose. Don't get too bent about it, even if you do find it difficult. As you all may all know, hopefully everyone knows this, schools don't have any data yet on IR performances. There are no percentiles. There's no way to predict exactly how IR will predict business school performance. So they're not going to weigh it very heavily for a while. It'll become more important as time goes on, but don't panic. You need to still focus on the main event, which is the rest of the GMAT. Okay, timing, we talked about this. Simple benchmarks, we're finding it works really well. Budget 2.5 minutes per question, and then move on. All right. IR is not adaptive, but you can't go back. Okay. Additional resources, you certainly do want to practice this. If you go on MBA.com, there are 15 free practice problems. I recommend that everyone look at them. Download GMAT Prep 2.0. There are 12 IR problems. Annoyingly, the IR problems for the exam 1 are exactly the same as the IR problems for exam 2. Okay. But at least they're there. You can order Quant Pack for refills, but it won't refill into the test. All right, again, a little annoying. One thing you might want to do until June 5th, GMAT is selling just the IR problems from OG13, so you could buy just those alone from GMAT's store. Manhattan GMAT, what do we have? Okay, so we have a book. We have a new strategy guide. It's part of our 5th edition guides, and it covers IR and the remaining analysis of an argument essay, both principles and a bunch of practice problems. Also, we have question bank online practice problems that I think you guys will really enjoy. We created this after analyzing everything available, and I think they cover very well the things that are tested. Manhattan also has 6 cats now with 6 different IR sections available for you. So you don't have to just take the same IR section over and over again, which sort of defeats the purpose. And I have a special offer for you. This from Manhattan GMAT Marketing. If you would like to download our practice bank, you can use this coupon, Beat The GMAT IR, and get it for $1.99. That'll be 30 problems for $1.99, less than what you would have to pay for the cup of coffee to sit in your favorite coffee shop for an hour and work on them. Okay, so with that, I am through all of my content and just ready to take questions. Anybody have any questions? I'd be happy to answer them for you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Liz. For those of you who have been listening, we've been speaking with Liz Moliski, who is a top GMAT instructor with Manhattan GMAT, and we've heard her lesson and introduction and deep dive to multi-source reasoning, which is a new question type featured on integrated reasoning. And at this point, I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. We do have a hard stop in 6 or 7 minutes, so we can jump into that. And before I do that, just a quick plug. If you're looking for a good Gatorade flavor, I'm very partial to Berry Rain. It's very tasty, so check that out at your local groceries. So first question, Liz, is from Kaplana. So she wants to know whether certain questions are weighted differently. So if you receive a particularly hard question, will that be weighted more if you answer that correctly versus answering correctly an easier multi-source reasoning question?
Okay, so what GMAT has said about this, they have rated the questions, the IR questions, as easy, medium, and hard, and they do in their scoring appear to weight the harder ones slightly more heavily. The MSRs tend to be hard. And so yes, there is a little bit of weighting, but there's no partial credit.
Right. Okay, so let's see if we can get to another question here. This question is from Frank. So he says, so the inference questions are not like DS, data sufficiency questions. Yes means yes. The statement is verifiably correct. Not that the information is sufficient to determining whether the statement is true or false. So how would these compare to data sufficiency?
Okay, so the way you would think about it is you're right. I mean, that's a good catch, and it is subtle. If you have enough information and you determine that the answer is true, which is often what people start off doing in data sufficiency, then you put down yes. Okay, but we know that in data sufficiency, if you have enough information and determine that the answer is false, you would also put down sufficient. Not on this. You would put down false if either you don't have enough information or if you have enough information and the answer is false. So good catch.
Hopefully that answers your question, Frank. I see another question coming in from Kay. Can we shuffle between tabs for MSR questions?
Yes, you can. You can shuffle as often as you want to. What we're finding in terms of keeping something in your mind, it's much better if you're shuffling focused on a particular part of the data. Okay?
Great. Let's see. Got a couple more questions here. I think we can do maybe 1 or 2 more here. This question is coming in from Nidhi. Nidhi's asking, let's see. Okay, so it's not easy to solve. Sometimes it's not easy to solve an MSR question in the pacing, the 2.5 minutes that you suggested. Is there a smart strategy or tactic for understanding when to guess and move on?
What I would do for that, just as I would use the same strategy that I use on the rest of the GMAT, have a pacing chart and figure out, you have a total of 12 questions, you have 30 minutes. So sort of mark your time off in, say, 10-minute blocks and figure out how far along you have to be. And if you get behind, be willing to guess. If you're on pace or a little ahead of pace, be willing to spend a little more time with the MSR.
And one follow-up question to that is, what happens if you skip entering an answer, if you just skip the question?
You can't. It's not possible. You have to click something or they won't let you continue.
Gotcha.
So click.
So click indeed. And with that, Liz, I think we're going to go ahead and conclude this session. For folks in the audience, we've been speaking with Liz Moliski. That's spelled M-O-L-I-S-K-I. I spell that because clearly from this session you've learned that Liz is a phenomenal teacher. She clearly knows her stuff when it comes to MSR, and I can only imagine other subjects tested on the GMAT. And Liz, I think you may be getting some more students after this session. So one of the things I'll mention before we conclude today is so the information that you see about this wonderful deal from Manhattan GMAT, this $1.99 access to the question bank, we're going to send you an email afterward and provide you some instructions on how to get that in case you don't feel like writing down what you see in front of you right now. And also be sure to check out ManhattanGMAT.com. It's a great website, not just for learning about services offered by Manhattan GMAT, but they have a great blog, tons and tons of resources, really great site in general. So Liz, really appreciate your time this evening. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge about MSRs with us.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, everyone, for coming. It was a real pleasure. Happy GMATting.
Happy GMATting indeed. To our audience, thank you so much for spending your evening with us. Wishing you lots of success with integrated reasoning, GMAT, test prep, as well as business school admissions. So all the best, and we hope to see you tomorrow for the next integrated reasoning session. This is a week-long series at 8 o'clock Eastern. We're going to deep dive table analysis. So I'm looking forward to it. Hope to see you there. All the best, guys.
All right.